Hey guys, it's Apex. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a build guide for the Barbarian in Mortal Online 2. Now if you're new to Mortal Online, you might not realize that the game actually doesn't have classes. There's no actual Barbarian in Mortal Online. But what I've done is I've created some beginner-friendly build guides that are associated with typical archetypes you'd see from other games like Ranger, Paladin, and in this case, Barbarian. These build guides are designed to be noob-friendly from a skill perspective, things that you need to buy to get the build online, and then also from a money investment perspective for getting the build up and running and keeping it maintained and fully operational so you can go hit people on the battlefield and not have problems, right? This build guide and all other beginner build guides also lead into what we call a veteran build guide, and these veteran build guides are designed both by me and other prominent members of the community. This one specifically will lead into a Lourdes build guide. There's also builds submitted by Diffriel and a few other people. All of these builds can be found on mo2builds.com, so if you ever have questions or you're looking for additional tools that can help you in your journeys in Knave, don't forget to check out mo2builds.com. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the build itself, talk about stats, how to build it, how to get it online and get going, and then I'm going to go into a tier list where I talk about every nuanced detail about the build in a little bit too much detail. And then, if you're interested, I would suggest skipping to the end of the video, peeking at the end of the tier list, and see how it stacks up. And if it's something that is of interest to you, and you think that this is something you might want to try, come back here and listen to me talk. Right, so let's get started. Intro's out of the way. I'm going to get a little bit more relaxed, and we'll go through this right now. So this character is designed to be a foot fighter / brawler, somebody that's going to, really mince it up on the battlefield. It is not very flexible in regards to being able to be a mage or a hybrid down the line. So if you're the type of person who really enjoys hitting things with your fist or your weapon really, really hard, this will be a great class for you. But if you're the type of person who enjoys a little bit of experimentation, hopping between different play styles, and also magic, or magic in any capacity really, I would stay clear of this. So what is a Thursar, and what's the lore behind it? A Thursar is basically the orc of Mortal Online, right? You're a big, ugly, dumb green orc, and your parents, one parent was a Thursar, like an actual Thursar. You'll be killing them in dungeons later, once you get into the game. And your other parent was a human, and humans have a bunch of different clades, or tribes, more or less. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick Thursar, because you can't change it, plus Tindremic, because it's going to give you the best stats possible. That's over here, right? That's these guys right here. So that indicates you're a Tindremic Thursar. You want to be age 30, you want to max your hideout, and you want to be stout on your weight. Don't worry about your stats too much when you're actually in the character creation screen. These stats come as you play the game. You hit stuff enough times, your strength goes up, and vice versa. But eventually, when you manipulate your stats, you want your stats to kind of end like this. Strength is how hard you hit things, how much you can carry. Dexterity is generally your movement speed. Constitution is how much health you have. Intelligence is how smart you are. You're very dumb. And psych is like magic protection, right? It's like kind of like wisdom, right? You have a really good melee damage bonus at 31%. The only thing that has a higher melee damage bonus than you is a Calard Thursar. So it's same race, but just a different tribe, really. You have really good health, you have decent stamina, your movement speed is pretty low. Your movement speed in combat is 420. There is another race called the Ogmir, which is slower than you, but you're the second slowest, so you're not going to be super fast. These guys are very big and tanky on the battlefield. Sorry about that. I'm going to mute my phone. So these guys are big, they're targets on the battlefield, and I'll talk about that when I get into the tier list. But from a stat perspective, from like a skill perspective, things that we want to highlight here, you have all the basic stuff that makes you a foot fighter. You've got aggressive stance, you've got anatomy, archery, that type of thing. You have 20 points in Ecumenical. 20 points in Ecumenical allows you to pick up Purify, which is going to remove a lot of debuffs on you that mages and stuff can put on you. So it gives you a little bit of defense there against mages. The 50 Psych means that it gives you some mana, so you actually have 63 mana, which means you have several Purifies that you can cast, which is really nice because your biggest counter to this build is mages and hybrids. They really, really fuck your shit up. So being able to cast Purify a lot is great, and you need 20 points in Ecumenical for that. And then Mounted Combat is at 50, and Controlled Riding is at 50. And the way that mounted skills work in this game is if I'm on foot and I hit you with my sword, I'm going to do 100% damage. If I have no mounted skills at all, and I get on horseback and then I hit you with my sword, I'm going to hit you for 50% damage. I'm going to hit you for half. If I had my mounted combat all the way at 100, and I'm on horseback now, and I hit you, then I hit you for the full amount. I hit you for 100%, just as if I was on foot. Having mounted combat here at 50 means that I'm going to hit you for 75% of what I would hit you for if I was on foot. Now there's an invisible skill here, it's a secondary called Mounted Charge, which adds additional damage based on the speed of your horse. So if you're just sitting on your horse and you're not going anywhere, it's not going to do anything. But most of the time when you're riding around swinging at people, you're going to be moving and your momentum comes into play. So it's more or less like you're going to be hitting people for 100% as long as your horse is moving. So it's a really good way to kind of get some edge there, some melee combat on your horse, and some utility. So let's talk about professions. In the bottom left here, this yellow box, that's your professions. For this class, I would say go weapon crafting, pick a specific weapon you want to run with, and go armor crafting, and then try to get the lores associated with those. The hardest one for you to get up in the beginning is going to be steel, and you're going to want to like either spam steel daggers or something like that to kind of power level that lore. But when you get proficient and you understand the mechanics behind professions, or maybe you join a guild that can supplement that crafting niche for you, I would drop the armor crafting and everything associated with it. That's going to unlock a lot more points for you, and then you can experiment with something different. There's really no wrong answer here, but you want to keep weapons because weapons are harder to come by if you want something specific. If you really want to get into pull swords, finding a good pull sword crafter that crafts it the way you like with the materials that you like can be kind of difficult and kind of annoying. Armor, on the other hand, is much easier to come by. And when you're trying to get your character ready to go, getting it, geared up to go out for an adventure, buying armor is getting cheaper and cheaper as the days go on. The key reason being weapons, when they go under 50% durability, start to do less damage. It's a stupid mechanic that needs to be changed. But because of this, tons of weapons, when they break under 50% durability, get thrown in the garbage. And every time you hit something, or every time you parry something, the durability takes a hit on the weapon. Now, contrast that with armor. You have 5 different pieces of armor, and they only take damage when they get hit, and they start with a humongous durability pool. So weapons break all the time at high frequency, and armor almost never breaks. And if you have good armor, you have steel or something like that, most of the time it gets recovered from the battlefield and thrown back into a box. That means that a single set of armor can often go through several people before it actually gets trashed or doesn't get picked up off the battlefield and gets deleted. So keeping your weapon crafting up and running is going to be just really good from an efficiency standpoint and being able to just get back into the battle, right? So that's my recommendation there. Now, before we get into tier list, I'd like to just ask that if you find this useful and this is something that is valuable to you, super thanks are appreciated. Not required, obviously, but if you throw some money at me, I would appreciate it because it helps me keep wife aggro to a minimum and lets me make these videos. So let's jump right into the tier list. PvP, I like to leave PvP kind of till the end, but we'll talk about PvE. Gone are the days of everybody's a mounted archer and everybody can be good at PvE. To be a mounted archer, you really have to invest in it now. This build is very heavily focused on ground fighting, and it does have the capacity for mounted combat, which I'll talk more about in a minute, but mounted combat's not good for PvE. Mobs have auto hit, they're like lock-on missiles most of the time. Some of them have ranged abilities now. So mounted combat's not very good for PvE. You can do certain things really well. You hit really hard, you have high damage throughput, and you have lifesteal, so you can kind of 1v1 any mob in the game if your stuff is off cooldown, but the cooldowns are kind of long. I would put this right in the middle of the pack. You're not going to excel at really anything, but there's not any humongous drawbacks, right? You could fight, you can 1v1 almost any type of mob in the game, and there are people that go in, once you're proficient, you understand how to kind of cheese the map a little bit, you can go kill minotaurs by yourself and do things like that. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but realize, you know, a lot of PvE out in the world at least is done from horseback, and this build, the way that this character works is you're really on foot. Like, you're a foot focused character, you're fighting, you know, emphasis on foot fighter. So PvE right in the middle of the road, right? Solo play, I would put this a little bit lower. You can be somewhat self-reliant with your leech, but you're gonna struggle against a lot of different classes if you bump into them out in the world, and you can't heal yourself, right? So one downside to this character is right now we're locked into a single party system, or a single character system, where you can only have one character until you buy a second account, which is terrible. But that does get changed in 2 patches. And if you're watching this at least 2 patches from now, where you know that you can have 2 characters, this character gets a lot easier to stomach as your dedicated melee foot fighter. Thursars are going to look more appealing to a lot of people when they know that they can play a different character, because the downside on a Thursar is you really can't be a hybrid. You really can't use magic. So your healing throughput, your sustain, is either your lifesteal or bandages. You don't really have any other way to heal, so, or utility really. So it can be kind of tough, and that also applies to pets, right? Most of the time, nobody uses bandages to heal pets. They use magic. So if you wanted to, you know, be like the guy on the main menu, the Thursar standing there with his pet saber-toothed tiger, that's not really a thing. It can't really be a thing unless you sacrifice and gimp your build entirely, and at that point you should have just been a different race. But this will get more palatable, more stomachable. I don't know. It will become more appealing to people when you're able to have 2 characters instead of just 1. But for now, it's really not that good, especially for your only character. 1v1 and dueling. 1v1 and dueling, those are 2 different things. 1v1 I consider out in the open world, fighting to the death against any build you can come up against, and this is below average. This is a very good duelist. It's up there in A tier, and I'll explain why. Dueling is generally considered to be melee. It's honorable, no magic allowed, there's all these other rules on top of it, and this character excels at that ground fighting gameplay, that foot fighting, 1v1 mano-a-mano. It's great for that. But for 1v1 to the death, if you bump into anything, any pure mage or even dex mages, that you're going to have a very tough time dealing with it. You are really good against tamers. Like, if they're a mounted mage, you might be able to use your mounted combat to counter them. If they have a pet, you can lifesteal, and you can absolutely crush pets. This build is super good against bad tamers that use their pet like a torpedo. Good tamers will attack you and then call their pet back. But if they torpedo their pet in, or you're trying to DPS through it, you can lifesteal and get an entire health bar and more off of a pet. So it's really, really good at killing pets. And you can kill mounted mages pretty well with mounted combat. Mounted combat is kind of the direct counter to a mounted mage, and you have a decent amount of it in this build, but you're going to lose to like actual dex mages on foot or hybrids on foot pretty regularly. And necros and stuff like that, if you get 2 or 3 greater walkers on you, it's gonna be just a huge pain for you to try and live through that, right? 1vx, again, it's kind of like in the middle here. I'm gonna put it down in E tier just because it's very, very skill dependent. You'll see guys like Lourdes play a Thursar, and they can 1vx because their skill level is so much higher than the opponents that they're fighting that they can make it happen. You can, take parries off of one opponent and hit the other one, which is a very common tactic. And you can make plays. Anybody can make plays, but the consistency in which you can do it is pretty low when you consider the fact that mages are more popular than they've ever been. And if you bump into a mage in the party, you've essentially lost at that point. So yeah, it's a little rough. Offense, we'll jump in and say offense is pretty good. It's either A or B tier. We'll say offense is up there. Longbows do slap. They're not the most reliable weapon, but they do slap. And they're extremely cheap. You can do full damage with a longbow for 100 primary points investment, which is great. They have decent mounted combat damage, so pulling out a melee weapon on horseback, I recommend starting with a sword because it's the easiest to land hits on. Don't do a lance because you're going to have a tough time, especially, and there's not room in the build for it unless you tweak a lot of things. But the offense is pretty good. Like, the only thing that hits harder than you from a melee perspective is a Calard Thursar, which is the same race but just a different subclass, really. So it's up there. It's got pretty good offense. Defense, it's either middle of the road or lower. The Glades are actually decent. You have Adamant, which is a flat damage bonus defense. So that's nice. You have your lifesteal, so you can face tank pets and things like that. But you don't have good throughput. You have to have a very expensive free armor weight trinket to be able to wear the best armors in the game, unlike Ogmirs who just get to wear them. So you need to get an expensive necklace that has free armor weight. You're looking for at least I think at least 8%, but you want to be up at the higher echelon of 12, as close to 12 as you can get without breaking the bank. And that will allow you to wear heavier armor like Ogmium and mix and match that with Chronite. So if as you progress this character, keep an eye out for a necklace that has really high free armor weight, and that'll help push this character into higher defense. But just flat out the gate, not including those trinkets and stuff, it's a little bit low on the defense. It doesn't have high burst sustain. You can't crack pipe like Ogmirs can. You're really big, so you're a very easy target for enemies. And this character generally stays in the back during team fights, which is what we're about to talk about. So your role in a team fight is very simple. You stay in the back and protect mages from divers. Divers will consistently go for your mages. You need to peel them and protect them as best as you can. It's not a useless position in a team fight. It's actually pretty valuable, and really good peelers are valuable to the party. But if I'm looking at the roster and I get to choose who I'm going to drop, and somebody says, hey, I've got a Thursar and I've got an Ogmir, which one do you want me to bring in? Yeah, the answer is consistently the Ogmir. I think that Thursars do need a buff before they're in line with Ogmirs. I'm not saying that they need a huge one, but there are some buffs that should come to Thursars soon, hopefully soon. But they don't get to go frontline unless you guys have handedly won the fight already. You should be playing backline. You should be peeling for your team. You should be playing that role the way that you in that capacity. And really, all the other melee characters can do that as well. Like, the pressure in the backline from other people ganging up on you is pretty low. You're literally killing the peelers. You just got to be able to put out some damage on those guys so that they get off the backline. You do hit really hard, so you might be the guy that kills secures. If a mage can light somebody up or somebody gets low, you could kill secure, or you could potentially line people up for the kill secure. You'll often find yourself hitting an Alvaran Dex footy really, really hard, taking off half his health, and then calling his name out as he runs away from you because you're big and slow. And you'll be like, hey, Apex is running left side, he's running back to their lines, and then hopefully if your mages are competent, they can kind of lock in on him and knock him out of the fight. So it's down there, man. It's not ideal. They're often the target of enemy shot callers because they're huge, they're easy to hit, they're slow, and they melt to magic. These ones melt less than Callards. I would say Callards would be F tier, but they definitely just kind of fall over, right? Money. When I mean money, I mean, like, how expensive is it to get this build online and keep it fully functional? S would be like, it's super cheap to be efficient, and F would be it's super expensive. Like a mounted mage generally has to put a bunch of money into their build so that it is effective and they don't just die immediately. This build is pretty damn good. I would say this is S tier for efficiency. Steel weapons are kind of the baseline, and those are getting cheaper and cheaper by the day. You can get swords and daggers and stuff for like 5 to 15 gold. So as progress goes forward and people make less and less armor because the durability is so high, it's just very easy to get a cheap weapon, and armor sets don't ever leave the economy, so those are cheap as well. You need a bandage and a longbow, which are also cheap. Sometimes you want to splurge for a high-level horse, because I like to be optimum in everything I do, so I'm running a max-level horse most of the time. But honestly, you don't need one. You might want a melee weapon for horseback. What most people do is they run messing or a Kaprum two-handed Rysar sword. That generally seems to be one of the better offensive weapons for mounted combat. It hits really, really hard, but it is very slow. But if you're on horseback, you don't care about that type of thing. So there's a lot of potential there for that. All right, so let's talk about utility. Like, when I think utility, magic is a great example of utility, being able to, do crawling hands and things like that. But this class doesn't ever get the option to do that. So this class is not the most utilitarian. Now, it has certain things like Stickenthrope that allow for a lot of self-heal. You can toggle your adamant, or whatever it's called, that one buff, so that you either take more physical damage or more magic damage, so you have like a little bit of utility there. But compared to a mage, it's really lackluster. One other thing that I put into utility is dismounting, or killing enemy horses. So fights need to come to a conclusion in this game by somebody dying, generally. And the way that happens is you have to kill someone's horse. Most of the time, unless you're already in a dungeon or something like that, for a fight to actually come to conclusion, you need to kill someone's horse, right? Rarely do you get, sometimes you get earthquakes, you knock people off, sometimes you get dismounted with melee weapons. So there is those potentials as well, but generally you want to be able to kill someone's horse. If you are in a pack, or you're rolling around with your guildies, and you see an enemy group and they just bolt, they just run because they're transporting or something like that, oftentimes you can't pull them into a fight until you kill a horse, and sometimes they'll even keep going. But being able to dismount someone, either by killing the horse or knocking them off the horse, is utilitarian. This build does have a healthy amount of mounted combat, but something you could consider if you want more utility is going full mounted combat, going full 100 points in it, finding points in your build that you could probably pull from. You've got, let me just look here, defensive stance is something that you could pull from. It's a little risky, you take a little bit more damage, but pulling points from a defensive stance, pulling 50 points from that would allow you to put 75 points in mounted combat, because you also have to put it into controlled riding. You could pull the full 100 and get 100 in it as well. Just realize your defense already isn't that good, and you're going to be able to take more damage from it. So it's not really a trade-off that I would want to do, because you get a decent benefit, but not anything crazy. So like their utility, just overall, it's not the worst in the game, but it's pretty friggin' low, man. Like, I almost put it in F. Skill cap in this game. Let's see. So what do I mean by skill cap? When I'm talking skill cap, an S tier skill cap would be something that is extremely easy to get good at and is effective basically no matter what. If we're talking about F tier, it would be something that is extremely hard to get good at and not the most efficient at what it is. I would say that this is, again, I hate to be so brutal on this build because I wish more people would be interested in playing it, but skill cap, it's pretty low. It's just below average, not the worst thing in the world. I say that because it's deceptively difficult from a positioning standpoint. You're going to learn somewhat quickly that you're a target. You're big, you're slow. People assume you don't have high psych, so they're going to focus you. Mages are going to focus you. And this class is really foot fighting centric. It's really focused around having a melee weapon, being good in duels, being able to go toe to toe with other foot fighters and just hit real hard. And those guys are also pretty sweaty when it comes to that stuff generally. So if you're dueling in Fab or Town Square, like it takes a lot of practice to get proficient in that. The 1v1 stuff is extremely difficult to get to the higher skill levels against, because you're fighting a bunch of people that have generally been playing the game for a while, because this game's not brand new. So you're going to get your teeth kicked in for a while. So it's not the easiest thing to just pick up and be good at. Not to discourage you, like the guys that are extremely good at that typically are well known. They're more or less famous within the game, within the community, for being excellent foot fighters, because it is extremely tough, right? It's much easier to make a name for yourself as a really prominent foot fighter than it would be to make a name for yourself as a mage, because a mage often supports the team and is their effects are less prominent than I got in a 1v1 fight against Kuthara and I killed him on the battlefield. Like, that is just easier to quantify your value, or, you know, I beat Lourdes in a 1v1, therefore I'm better. It's much easier to quantify that than, you know, this guy is a heal machine, right? So if you're interested in legacy and making a name for yourself and stuff like that, this is a good character for that. Uptime. How much uptime do you have? I would say it's middle of the road. Uptime for this class, I would say, is how much can you cycle your buffs. And not playing this race that much, I do know a lot of people who do. Lourdes is a great example, and he's in the opinion in the category, clean as well, that you just can't rotate those buffs enough. The cooldown on their buffs is too long. The buffs are somewhat cool, and most of them are useful, aside from like one or two, and they have more shouts and battle cries than anybody, but the timer on them is just so long. You know, a 5-minute timer on a 10% damage buff, 10% ain't that much, right? So maybe lower the timer to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that. Give them a small buff, and the uptime will be higher. The most dependent cooldown they have is Lifesteal, and that has a pretty long timer as well, because it is powerful, it is potent, but, you know, your build, like your skills themselves, are online almost entirely during a fight. When I talk about your skills, I'm talking about these guys here. How often are you getting value from them? Almost all of them you're getting value from the whole time, except for mounted combat. Obviously, if you're on foot and controlled riding, if you're on foot, you're not getting value from those two things. But most fights start on horseback. At least if you're in the open world, you're getting value from it at the beginning of the fight, and everything else you're getting value like the whole time. So from that perspective, I guess it's actually probably a little bit higher. Like, you're getting value from your build almost the entire time. It's just got long cooldowns, so you can't really justify putting it any higher than B tier. Crafting. This is arguably lower than average, but not by much. And because I'm running out of room in D tier, I'll put it right here. The reason being, intelligence is generally the skill that is going to contribute additional points to the primary or to your professions. So having a high intelligence gives you a bunch of extra free points. They also don't really have any clades that you can dip into for crafting. Looking here on the right hand side, there's not much. And one downside of this class is a lot of these clades are almost essential for your character to feel finished, to feel like you are at optimum efficiency on the battlefield. And for a new player, that can be daunting. Getting all of these level ups, basically getting your clade level higher, does take a while if you don't know what you're doing. So with that in mind, crafting, it's just below average, not by much. It's not, professions, you're not going to miss out on too much. PvP, it really depends on what aspect you're looking at. If we look at all the PvP related things, dueling it's great at. 1v1 to the death against any build, not the best. Solo, even worse. 1vx, even worse. Team fights is pretty bad. People are gonna hate on me for putting PvP so low, especially if they play this class. They take it like as a personal attack. I would say it's below average. It's between D and E tier, honestly. If I'm building my roster and I'm looking at who I can take, and if somebody says, hey, I have a Thursar and I have anything else, most of the time I'm like, hey, just get on that other thing, right? So it's below average, between D and E tier. It's not F, it's not useless. You can still make a name for yourself. You can still, peel really well, but not the best. Overall, it's gonna be tough, man. It's gonna be tough. I would say it's D tier. I'm running out of room in the category because so many things would fit in it, but it's below average. It might even be E tier, man. People are gonna get sad. They're gonna get butthurt that I put it there. It needs a buff, and I know buffs are coming, to be determined what they are, but when it gets a buff, it's gonna need some big buffs to get up in there. It's gonna need some really big buffs to get higher, but it's right here, man. There are definitely better builds out there for you to go with. The really famous guys that play this, I feel like often built it when they were a total noob and never deleted their character. They never wanted to re-roll, so they just kind of go with it. There's definitely better builds out there right now. When it gets buffed, maybe you'll change my mind, but for now, you could be better. Again, if this was helpful for you, super thanks are great. I appreciate that. This build and all builds can be found on mo2builds.com. Thanks for watching.
Kill Thursars, behead Thursars, roundhouse kick a Thursar into Granum, slam dunk a Thursar baby into the sewers, crucify filthy orcs, defecate in a Thursar's food, launch Thursars into the sun, stir-fry Thursars in a cooking pot, toss Thursars into active volcanoes, urinate into a Thursar's boots, judo throw Thursars into a woodcutter, twist Thursars heads off, report Thursars to the guards, karate chop Thursars in half, trap Thursars in quicksand, put Thursars in the crusher, liquefy Thursars in a flame strike, eat Thursars, dissect Thursars, exterminate Thursars in miasma, stomp Thursar skulls under your boots, lobotomize Thursars, drown Thursars in fried springbok grease, vaporize Thursars with mental projectile, kick old Thursars down the stairs,